Marcus Reed sat at his kitchen table staring at the eviction notice. The paper trembled in his hands, not from fear, though there was plenty of that, but from the effort it took to keep reading. Final notice. Pay $3,200 within 14 days or vacate the premises. The words blurred together after the third read-through, but the meaning remained brutally clear. 38 years old, 2 decades of working, and this is what he had to show for it, a piece of paper telling him he was out of chances. The apartment was quiet except for the radiator's rhythmic clank and the occasional creak of floorboards settling in the cold. Lawrenceville had been a decent neighborhood once, back when the steel mills were running and people had money to maintain their properties. Now it was just tired, like everything else in Marcus's life. Peeling paint curled away from the walls in strips. The linoleum in the kitchen had worn through to bare concrete in places. He'd stopped seeing it months ago, the way you stop noticing a scar after enough time passes. Ethan was asleep in the next room. Marcus had made sure of that before opening the envelope. 7 years old, and the boy had already learned to read his father's face too well. He'd seen Marcus go pale at the mailbox earlier and asked if everything was okay. Marcus had lied, said it was just bills, nothing to worry about. The way Ethan had nodded, quick, accepting, not pressing for details that had hurt worse than the eviction notice itself. Marcus set the paper down and pulled out the envelope he kept in his jacket pocket. $127. That was everything left after groceries this week. He'd need gas money to get to work. Maybe $40 for that. The math didn't work. It never worked anymore. He let his head drop into his hands and allowed himself exactly 30 seconds of self-pity. That was the rule. 30 seconds to feel it, then move forward. He'd learned that from his father back when the old man was still alive. You could bend, his dad used to say, but you couldn't break. Not when people depended on you. The memory of Jessica flashed unbidden, standing in this same kitchen 2 years ago, her face cold with contempt as she told him she was leaving. "You'll never be enough, Marcus." Her new boyfriend had been waiting in a car outside, engine running. She'd taken the settlement money from the divorce, every last penny Marcus had managed to save. Took the car too. Left him with their son and $47,000 in debt, medical bills from her spending credit cards. She'd maxed out loans he'd co-signed because he'd trusted her. He should have seen it coming. The signs had been there. Late nights out, phone calls she'd take in other rooms. That hollow look she'd get when she looked at him, like she was calculating the cost of staying versus the cost of leaving and coming up short either way. Marcus pushed the memory aside. No point dwelling on it. She was gone. Ethan was here. That was what mattered. His phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting up with his mother's name. He stared at it for 3 rings before answering. Diane Reed didn't call at 10:30 on a weeknight unless something was wrong. "Mom." "Don't argue." Her voice cut through the line, sharp and matter-of-fact. "Just come to the house tomorrow. There's a way out, but you're not going to like it." The line went dead before Marcus could respond. He set the phone down slowly, his chest tightening. His mother wasn't prone to drama. When she said something, she meant it, and when she said he wouldn't like it, that meant it was bad. Real bad. Marcus stood and walked to Ethan's doorway, watching his son sleep. The boy's face was peaceful in a way that made Marcus's throat constrict. Ethan still believed things would work out, still trusted his father to fix things. That faith was a weight Marcus carried every moment of every day. Tomorrow, he told himself. Deal with it tomorrow. He didn't sleep. The warehouse was massive, 3 football fields of concrete floor metal shelving that reached 50 feet high, and the constant beep, beep, beep of forklifts backing up. Marcus had been operating the same yellow crown lift for 11 months now. The job paid $14 an hour, which was barely enough to survive on, even when he was picking up overtime. These days, overtime was scarce. Management had cut hours across the board. Greg Sampson stood near the break room entrance, arms crossed, watching Marcus load a pallet of boxed electronics onto a truck. Greg was 45 but looked older, his face weathered from years of manual labor before he'd made supervisor. He believed in hard work, traditional values, and the idea that a man's worth was measured by his ability to provide. He'd made that clear the first week Marcus started. Marcus finished securing the load and climbed down from the forklift. Greg was still watching. "Read." Greg's voice carried across the loading bay. "Got a minute?" It wasn't really a question. Marcus walked over, wiping his hands on his work pants. The November morning was cold enough that their breath came out in clouds. "Heard you're getting desperate." Greg's eyes narrowed. "Don't do anything stupid." Marcus kept his face neutral. "I don't know what you mean." "The hell you don't. Eviction notice taped to your locker yesterday. Landlord must really want to make a point putting it up where everyone can see." Greg shook his head. "A man's supposed to provide. When he can't do that, he's got no business calling himself a man." The words landed like a punch to the gut, but Marcus didn't react. Couldn't afford to. He needed this job, needed the paycheck meager as it was. Getting into it with Greg would accomplish nothing except making his life harder. "I'm handling it." "Yeah, how?" Greg's skepticism was palpable. "You behind on rent, behind on everything else. What are you gonna do, win the lottery?" Marcus turned to walk away. Greg's voice followed him. "Just don't embarrass yourself, or this place. We got standards." In the break room, Marcus found the printout someone had taped to his locker. 10 signs you're a gold digger. Half the items were circled in red marker. He ripped it down, crumpled it, and threw it in the trash. But the word that had been scrawled at the bottom stayed with him. Parasite. Lincoln Elementary Academy sat on a tree-lined street in Highland Park, its brick facade and well-maintained playground a stark contrast to the neglect creeping through Marcus's neighborhood. The school was one of the few things Jessica had fought for in the divorce. Ethan, staying in a decent district, getting a decent education. Marcus had agreed, even though it meant driving 20 minutes each way. His son deserved better than the schools near their apartment. Ethan came running out when the bell rang, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. But before he reached Marcus, his teacher intercepted them. Mrs. Patterson, a kind-faced woman in her 50s who'd taught for 30 years and seen every kind of family crisis imaginable. "Mr. Reed, do you have a moment?" Marcus's stomach dropped. "Is everything okay?" Mrs. Patterson's expression was carefully neutral, the look of someone delivering bad news gently. "Ethan's falling asleep in class. Multiple days this week. And I've noticed he's been wearing the same clothes more often than usual." She paused, measuring her words. "We're concerned about his home situation." Heat crept up Marcus's neck. Shame. Raw and immediate. Ethan was wearing the same 3 shirts in rotation because Marcus had been putting off laundry to save quarters. The boy was tired because their apartment was freezing at night and neither of them slept well. "I'm handling it." "I'm sure you are." Mrs. Patterson's kindness somehow made it worse. "But if you need resources, food assistance, heating support, we have programs that can help." "We're fine." The lie tasted bitter. Ethan appeared at his side, clutching a permission slip. His face was bright with hope, the way only a 7-year-old's could be. "Dad, look." He held up the paper. "Field trip to the Carnegie Science Center next month. It's only $45. Can we go?" Marcus took the form, his vision blurring slightly as he read it. $45. Might as well have been 4,000. He opened his mouth to say no, to explain that money was tight, but the words stuck in his throat. Ethan loved science. Talked about astronauts and planets and how things worked. The kid had a model of the solar system in their apartment that he'd built from cardboard and paint because they couldn't afford the store-bought kind. "It's okay if we can't, Dad." Ethan's voice was small now, careful. "I know money's tight. Maybe next year." 7 years old, and he's already learning to give up on things. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. "We'll see, bud." They walked to the car in silence. Marcus's beat-up Honda sat in the far corner of the lot, rust eating through the wheel wells. As he buckled Ethan in, the boy asked the question Marcus had been dreading. "Is Mom ever coming back?" Marcus froze his hands, still on the seatbelt. He couldn't look at his son. Couldn't lie. Couldn't tell the truth either. "I don't know," and Miss Patterson watched them drive away, her expression full of pity that Marcus felt like a physical weight pressing down on his shoulders. He pulled out of the parking lot and headed toward his mother's house in Greenfield because whatever she had to say, it couldn't be worse than this. He was wrong. Diane Reed's house was a post-war bungalow that hadn't changed in 40 years. Yellowing wallpaper, crucifixes on the walls, the smell of coffee and furniture polish. She'd raised Marcus and his brother Garrett here after their father died, working double shifts as a school secretary to keep them fed. The house was paid off now, but Diane had never seen the point in updating it. "Waste of money," she'd say. "It still works, doesn't it?" Garrett's truck was already parked in the driveway when Marcus pulled up. His older brother worked construction, had a steady income, and a wife and 2 kids in the suburbs. Garrett had always been the responsible one, the one the family leaned on. Marcus used to resent that. Now he was just tired. They were waiting in the living room, Diane in her usual chair by the window, Garrett on the couch looking uncomfortable. The setup felt like an intervention. Marcus remained standing. "Sit down, Marcus." "I'm good." Diane didn't argue. She pulled out an iPad, something Garrett must have bought her, because she'd never spend money on technology, and turned it to face him. The screen showed a Forbes article. "Pittsburgh's robot queen Victoria Brennan's 2.3 billion manufacturing empire." The woman in the photo was young, maybe mid-30s, with sharp features and blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun. She sat behind a desk in what looked like a corner office, floor-to-ceiling windows, framing the Pittsburgh skyline behind her. Her expression was cold, calculating. The kind of person who could fire 100 people before lunch and not lose sleep over it. "Victoria Brennan," Diane began, her tone flat and businesslike. 35. Founder and CEO of Brennan Automation. Company went public 3 years ago. Worth about $2.3 billion. She paused. Paralyzed in a car crash on I-376 3 years ago. Been in a wheelchair ever since. Marcus stared at his mother. "Why are you telling me this?" "She's looking for a husband." The words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus waited for the punchline. When none came, he laughed, short and bitter. "You're kidding." "Do I look like I'm kidding?" Diane set the iPad down. "It's a private arrangement. She wants someone stable, someone who won't run when things get hard. Your name came up through a mutual acquaintance from church." "Someone desperate enough to sell himself, you mean?" Diane's expression didn't change. "You got a better option." Marcus turned to Garrett, looking for support. His brother met his eyes and shrugged. "Mark, I'd do the same thing if I had a kid to feed." "You're serious?" Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You want me to marry some billionaire I've never met because what? She needs a pity case to make herself feel better." "She's looking for someone stable," Diane repeated. "Someone who won't run when things get hard. That's you. And before you get on your high horse, remember you're 2 weeks away from living in your car." The truth of it struck like a slap. Marcus sank onto the arm of the couch, his legs suddenly unsteady. "What does she get out of it?" "That's for you to figure out." Diane stood, indicating the conversation was over. "You meet her Saturday, 2 p.m. Address is in Soakley Heights. Dress nice." Marcus drove home on autopilot, Diane's words echoing in his head. Soakley Heights. That was where the real money lived, estates behind gates, driveways longer than his entire street. He'd driven through once years ago just to see how the other half lived. The houses looked like museums. The Fort Pitt Bridge stretched before him, its steel cables lit against the darkening sky. Below, the three rivers converged, the Allegheny, Monongahela, and Ohio, meeting at the point. Pittsburgh at dusk was beautiful in a worn, industrial way, the kind of beauty that came from surviving hard times. Marcus pulled over at Point State Park, the fountain at the river's edge, shooting water 50 feet into the air. Families walked the paths, couples with strollers, kids on bikes, people who looked like they weren't 2 weeks from homelessness. He watched them and felt the distance between their lives and his, like a physical chasm. His phone buzzed. Text from the landlord. Eviction proceedings start in 10 days. Don't bother begging. 10 days. Not even 2 weeks. Marcus thought about Ethan, about the permission slip for the Science Center trip, about his son wearing the same 3 shirts because Marcus couldn't afford to do laundry more than once a week, about the way Ethan had asked if his mother was coming back, his voice so small and hopeful it had broken something inside Marcus that might never heal. There's a difference between bending and breaking. I've been bending for 2 years. How much more before I snap? He pulled out his phone and stared at his mother's number. 1 call. That's all it would take. 1 call, and he'd be agreeing to meet a stranger to sell whatever was left of his dignity for a chance to keep his son off the streets. His thumb hovered over the screen. That night, Ethan brought an old photo to the kitchen table while Marcus was sorting through bills. The picture showed all 3 of them, Marcus, Jessica, and Ethan, when he was 3. They were at the zoo, everyone smiling. Marcus remembered that day, remembered thinking they'd make it work somehow, that love would be enough. Were we happy then? Marcus looked at his son's face, so earnest and trusting. Yeah, bud, we were. What happened? How do you explain to a 7-year-old that sometimes people grow apart, that love isn't always enough, that your mother looked at your father one day and decided she deserved better? Sometimes people change. They want different things. It doesn't mean anyone's fault. It was a lie, but a necessary one. Ethan didn't need to know the truth, that his mother had walked out without looking back, that she sent a check once a month and called on birthdays but never asked to see him, that she'd started a new life in Cleveland with a new husband, and had made it clear Ethan wasn't part of that picture. Grandma said you might meet someone new. Ethan's voice was careful testing. A lady who could help us. Marcus's chest tightened. Of course Diane had said something. She'd never been one for subtlety. Maybe. I'm going to meet her this weekend. Do you love her? I don't even know her yet, buddy. Ethan considered this, his face scrunched in concentration. Then he looked up at Marcus with those wide, trusting eyes. If we move to a new house, can I bring my telescope? The telescope was a cardboard tube with a lens Marcus had found at a yard sale for $5. Barely functional, but Ethan loved it. Spent hours looking at the moon through their apartment window. Yeah, we'll bring everything important. Ethan smiled, and something in Marcus's chest both lifted and shattered at the same time. The boy climbed into his lap, small arms wrapping around Marcus's neck. You're the most important thing, Dad. Marcus held his son and felt the weight of every decision that had led them here. Every choice, every failure, every moment of weakness, but also every moment he'd gotten up and kept going, kept trying, kept fighting to give this boy something better than poverty and broken promises. After Ethan went to bed, Marcus sat alone in the kitchen and stared at his phone. The eviction notice lay on the table, the bill pile next to it, the photo of his family that no longer existed. He picked up the phone and dialed his mother. She answered on the first ring. I'll meet her. Diane didn't sound surprised. Saturday, 2 p.m., address is in Sewickley Heights. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer than Marcus had heard it in years. Wear your interview clothes. Be respectful. Don't mention money first. What's wrong with her? Why does she need this? Car crash damaged her spine. She'll be in a wheelchair. Don't stare. That's not what I meant. I know what you meant. Diane's voice hardened again. She's going to test you, Marcus. Rich people always do. Just be yourself. That's the only thing you've got that's worth anything." The line went dead. Marcus sat in the darkness of his kitchen, the radiator clanking its familiar rhythm, and wondered what version of himself he was supposed to be. The man who'd believed hard work and integrity would be enough. That man was gone. What remained was someone desperate enough to marry a stranger, someone willing to trade whatever was left of his pride for a chance to keep his son safe. He thought about his father dead, 15 years now. Thought about all those days the old man had come home from the mill covered in soot and sweat, his hands scarred from the work. His dad had taught him that a man's character wasn't measured by what he had, but by what he did when he had nothing. Right now, Marcus had nothing. Less than nothing. And what he was about to do, meeting this woman, considering this arrangement, felt like the final surrender. The last admission that he'd failed at everything that mattered. But Ethan deserved better than sleeping in a car. Deserved better than going hungry. Deserved better than a father too proud to do whatever it took to keep him safe. Marcus looked at the eviction notice one more time, then folded it and tucked it into his jacket pocket. Point of no return. Tomorrow he'd tell Ethan they were going on a drive this weekend. Meet someone new. See a fancy house. Make it sound like an adventure. Tonight he let himself feel the weight of what he was about to become. Saturday morning arrived too fast. Marcus stood in front of his bathroom mirror wearing the only blazer he owned, borrowed from Garrett, too big in the shoulders, smelling faintly of sawdust. The shirt underneath was 5 years old, but clean pressed as well as he could manage without an iron. He looked like a man playing dress-up, trying to be something he wasn't. His reflection stared back, weathered face, calloused hands that no amount of scrubbing could fully clean. Eyes that looked older than 38. This was who he was. A warehouse forklift operator with no prospects and less than $200 to his name. He thought about turning around, calling his mother, saying he couldn't do this. But then he heard Ethan in the kitchen humming to himself while eating cereal, and the thought died. His son. That's what this was about. Only that. The drive to Sewickley Heights took 30 minutes. Marcus followed the GPS through neighborhoods that got progressively nicer. Well-maintained lawns. Newer cars. Houses that looked like they belonged in magazines. By the time he reached the address his mother had given him, he felt like he'd crossed into another country. The estate sat behind iron gates, an intercom mounted on a stone pillar at the entrance. Marcus rolled down his window and pressed the button. A woman's voice answered, professional and cold. "Marcus Reed, I have an appointment." The gate swung open without another word. The driveway was lined with trees that must have been 100 years old, their bare branches creating a tunnel overhead. The house at the end was modern, all glass and steel, sharp angles and clean lines. Nothing like the old money mansions Marcus had expected. This was new wealth, the kind that came from building something from nothing. The kind that didn't apologize for itself. A woman in her 50s answered the door before Marcus could knock. She was dressed in a gray suit, her hair pulled back in a bun, her expression neutral. "Mr. Reed, I'm Sharon Mills, Ms. Brennan's assistant. Please come in." Marcus followed her through a hallway that smelled of expensive wood polish and fresh flowers. The house was immaculate, minimalist decor, floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Ohio River. Art on the walls that probably cost more than Marcus made in a year. Everything was clean and cold and expensive in a way that made him acutely aware of his borrowed blazer and scuffed shoes. Sharon led him to a sitting room at the back of the house. Through the windows, Marcus could see a perfectly manicured lawn sloping down toward the river, but his attention fixed on the woman in the wheelchair facing those windows, her back to the door. "Ms. Brennan, Mr. Reed is here." Sharon left without another word, the door clicking shut behind her. The woman didn't turn. Marcus stood there uncertain, feeling like he'd walked into a job interview for a position he wasn't qualified for. The silence stretched. Finally, she spoke. "Why are you here, Mr. Reed?" Her voice was controlled, each word precise. Marcus couldn't see her face, just the back of her head and the sleek chrome of the wheelchair. "Your assistant said you wanted to meet me." "No." She turned then, the wheelchair pivoting with mechanical smoothness. "Why are you really here?" Victoria Brennan looked like her photo-sharp features. Blonde hair pulled back, expensive clothes that probably cost more than Marcus's rent. But the photo hadn't captured the intelligence in her eyes, the way she seemed to take in everything about him in a single glance. She looked at him the way a scientist might examine a specimen, curious but detached. Marcus made a decision. She'd asked for honesty. He'd give her that, at least. "I need money. I have a son and no way to keep him fed." Something flickers across her face, surprise maybe, or appreciation. It was gone too quickly to read. "Most men lie to me about their motives. They dress it up in romance or destiny." She rolled closer, her eyes never leaving his face. "You just told me you're here for money. That's either the most honest thing I've heard in years, or you're a better liar than the others." "I don't have the energy to lie anymore." Victoria studied him for a long moment. Marcus forced himself to hold her gaze, even though every instinct told him to look away. She was assessing him, weighing something he couldn't see. Finally, she nodded as if reaching a conclusion. "Good. Liars are exhausting." She turned her wheelchair toward the windows again. "Come back next Saturday. Same time. We'll see if your honesty lasts." It took Marcus a second to process. She was dismissing him, after 5 minutes. "That's it. For now." Marcus left the sitting room in a daze. Sharon materialized in the hallway to escort him out, her expression still professionally neutral. As they reached the front door, she spoke quietly. "She doesn't usually grant second meetings." Marcus glanced back. Through the sitting room doorway, he could see Victoria still in her wheelchair, facing those floor-to-ceiling windows. Her posture was perfect, her stillness complete. She looked like a statue, beautiful, cold, and utterly alone. The gates closed behind him with a clang that sounded like finality. Marcus sat in his car for several minutes, trying to make sense of what had just happened. He'd been in that house less than 15 minutes, hadn't learned anything about her except that she was rich, paralyzed, and testing him somehow. His phone buzzed. Text from Diane. "How did it go?" Marcus stared at the message, then at the estate behind its iron gates. He thought about Ethan waiting at home, about the eviction notice in his jacket pocket, about the permission slip for a $45 field trip his son had already learned not to ask for twice. He typed back, "She wants to meet again." As Marcus drove away from Soakley Heights, the afternoon sun breaking through November clouds, he couldn't shake the image of Victoria Brennan in her wheelchair facing those windows like she was looking at something only she could see, or looking for something she'd lost and didn't know how to find. Whatever test she was running, Marcus was apparently still in it. Whether that was good news or a disaster waiting to happen, he had no idea. But he'd be back next Saturday. Because what choice did he have when you had nothing you couldn't afford? Pride. You took whatever chance came along and hoped it didn't destroy you in the process. His father had taught him that a man's character was measured by what he did when he had nothing. Marcus was about to find out what kind of man he really was. The warehouse felt smaller on Monday morning. Marcus operated his forklift with mechanical precision, loading pallets, backing up, moving forward, the beeping of the reverse alarm, a metronome counting down his life in quarter-hour increments. He'd worked 6 hours before Greg Sampson appeared in his peripheral vision, arms crossed, that particular expression on his face that meant trouble. Break room at noon was worse. Marcus had his head down eating the sandwich he'd made from the last of the bread when Rick from receiving walked past and made a comment just loud enough to carry. "Heard you're dating some rich lady in a wheelchair." The room went quiet. Not silent, but that particular kind of quiet where everyone's listening while pretending not to. Marcus didn't respond. Kept eating. Willed himself invisible. Greg materialized in the doorway. "That true read? I don't see how that's company business." "It's company business when you're making us all look bad." Greg stepped into the room and Marcus recognized the performance for what it was, a supervisor establishing dominance in front of an audience. Real men don't need women to save them. A coworker Marcus barely knew. Dave, something older guy who'd been here forever, started to speak up. Greg, leave him. Stay out of it. Greg's eyes never left Marcus. You're setting a bad example, Reed. Men are supposed to provide. That's what we do. We work, we earn, we take care of our families. We don't latch onto rich women like what? Marcus heard himself say it before he could stop. Like parasites. The word hung in the air, ugly and final. Marcus stood slowly, his sandwich forgotten. Every man in that break room was watching now, waiting to see if this would escalate into something physical. Part of Marcus wanted it to. Wanted to hit someone, hurt, someone, make someone else feel as small as he felt. But he needed this job. Needed the $14 an hour. So he walked out instead, leaving his lunch on the table, feeling their eyes on his back. At his locker afterward, he found the printout. Someone had taken the time to look up 10 signs you're a gold digger, online, print it, and tape it to the metal door. Half the items were circled in red marker. At the bottom, in different handwriting, parasite. Marcus ripped it down and threw it in the trash. But he couldn't throw away the truth of it, because that's exactly what he was doing. Wasn't it latching on? Selling himself. Trading whatever dignity he had left for a chance to keep his son fed. His hands shook as he clocked out. Not from anger anymore. From shame. Saturday arrived like an execution date. Marcus borrowed the same blazer from Garrett, drove the same route through progressively nicer neighborhoods, pressed the same intercom button at the iron gates. This time, when Sharon Mills opened the door, she led him through different corridors to a different room. The conservatory was humid and green, filled with plants Marcus couldn't name. Ferns climbed trellises toward a glass ceiling. Orchids bloomed in careful rows. In the center, next to a large terrarium containing what looked like an elaborate ant farm, Victoria sat in her wheelchair. She wore jeans and a simple sweater today, still expensive but less formal, almost human. Mr. Reed. She gestured to a chair across from her. Thank you for coming back. Marcus sat. The ants in their terrarium moved with purposeful industry, carrying food, building tunnels, organized chaos contained in glass. Tell me about your son. The question caught him off guard. He'd expected more interrogation about his desperation, his debts, his failures. Not this. Ethan. He's 7. Smart kid. Loves science, wants to be a NASA engineer someday. Marcus found himself talking despite his intention to stay guarded. He's got this telescope, basically a cardboard tube with a lens, and he spends hours looking at the moon through our apartment window. Built a model of the solar system out of stuff we found around the house because we couldn't afford the store-bought version. Victoria watched the ants as he spoke, her expression unreadable. What does he need? A father who can provide for him. The bitterness in Marcus's voice surprised him. A stable home. A chance at a decent education. Normal things that shouldn't be this hard. Why did your marriage fail? There it was. The real question. Marcus considered lying, prettying it up. But she'd asked for honesty last time, and that seemed to be the only currency he had worth anything. I couldn't give her the life she wanted. I was never going to make enough. He paused. She left for someone who could. And you blame yourself. It wasn't a question, but Marcus answered anyway. Every day. Victoria turned her wheelchair to face him fully. What do you want for your son? I want him to never feel ashamed of where he comes from. The words came fast now, honest. But I also want him to have choices I never had. I want him to go on that science center field trip and not worry about the $45. I want him to dream about being an astronaut without wondering if we can afford the books to teach him what he needs to know. Those things contradict each other. Maybe, but I want both anyway. Something shifted in Victoria's face, not quite a smile. but a softening. If I said yes to this arrangement, what would you tell Ethan? Would you lie to him? Marcus thought about his son's face, those trusting eyes. I'd tell him sometimes adults make hard choices to protect the people they love. I'd tell him that's what I was doing. Protecting him. Victoria nodded slowly, as if he'd confirmed something she'd suspected. Good answer. Sharon appeared in the doorway before Marcus could respond. Ms. Brennan, your conference call in 10 minutes. Thank you, Sharon. Victoria turned back to Marcus. I'll be in touch. Another dismissal. Another test concluded. Marcus left more confused than he'd arrived. 4 days later, Sharon Mills called him at the warehouse. Marcus took the call outside in the cold November air, watching his breath cloud in front of him. Ms. Brennan has made her decision. Marcus's heart hammered. And the wedding will be December 15th, 8 weeks from now. Sharon's tone was clinical, like she was scheduling a business meeting. A prenuptial agreement is being drafted. You should know the terms. No money up front, no access to Ms. Brennan's accounts. If the marriage ends within the first year, you leave with nothing. If it lasts, your son's education will be funded through PhD level and you'll receive a monthly living stipend. Do you accept these terms? Marcus leaned against the concrete wall of the loading dock. 8 weeks, December 15th, a stranger, a ceremony, a life he couldn't begin to imagine. Mr. Reed, I understand I'll have no legal claim to her assets. That's correct. And if I walk away before a year, I get nothing. Nothing. Marcus closed his eyes, saw Ethan's face, heard his voice asking about the science center trip, saying it was okay if they couldn't afford it already. Learning at 7 years old to lower his expectations because his father couldn't provide. I'm not marrying her for her assets. I'm marrying her so my kid doesn't end up in a shelter. Sharon was silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was fractionally warmer. I'll send the paperwork to your address. Wait, why is she doing this? What does she get? That's between you and Ms. Brennan. A pause. Mr. Reed, one more thing. Ms. Brennan wants you to know she's watching how you handle the next 2 months, how you behave when no one's rewarding you for it. That will tell her everything. The line went dead. Marcus stood in the cold, staring at his phone. Another test. Always another test. But this one had a timeline now. 8 weeks to prove something he didn't fully understand, to a woman who wouldn't tell him the rules. He went back inside and finished his shift in a daze. Greg Sampson watched him with narrowed eyes, probably wondering what the phone call had been about. Marcus didn't care anymore. Let them talk. Let them judge. He'd made his choice. That night he sat Ethan down at the kitchen table, the same table where they'd looked at the old family photo, where Marcus had opened the eviction notice, where every hard conversation in their lives seemed to happen. Bud, I need to talk to you about something. Ethan looked up from his homework, instantly alert. Kids had a sixth sense for when something serious was coming. You remember Victoria, the lady I told you about? The one with the big house? Yeah, her. Marcus took a breath. I'm going to marry her. We're going to move to her house. Ethan's face went through several emotions: confusion, hope, worry. Do you love her? I don't know her well enough yet to love her, Bud. This is different than most marriages. Different how? How do you explain a transaction to a 7-year-old? How do you tell your son you're selling yourself without making him feel responsible? Sometimes adults make arrangements that are more about helping each other than about feelings. Victoria needs someone she can trust. I need to make sure you have a home and a good school and all the things you deserve. So we're helping each other. Will she be my mom? No. She won't replace your mom. But she'll be part of our family. In her own way. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, processing. Will I have my own room? The question broke Marcus's heart. His son's expectations were so low, his needs so simple. Just a room of his own, a place that wasn't a third-floor walk-up with peeling paint and a radiator that clanked all night. "Yeah, bud, you'll have your own room. Will she read me bedtime stories? I don't know. We're still figuring that out." Ethan nodded, accepting this with the resilience of a child who'd learned early that life didn't always make sense. "Okay, as long as you're there, Dad. You're not going anywhere, right?" Marcus pulled his son close, holding him tight. "Never. You and me, we're a team. That's never changing." The family dinner at Diane's house happened 2 weeks later. Word had spread fast Marcus Reed was marrying Pittsburgh's richest woman, the billionaire in the wheelchair, the robot queen who'd built an empire and then gotten paralyzed in a car crash. The family showed up in force, circling like vultures around roadkill. Aunt Carol arrived with her husband Frank, all smiles and fake warmth. "Marcus, honey, we're so happy for you. You've always been such a survivor." Cousin Jennifer leaned against the kitchen counter with a glass of wine, her expression knowing. "At least you're honest about why you're doing it. That's more than most people can say." Uncle Frank cornered Marcus by the refrigerator. "How much is she worth?" $2.3 billion. You locked down that prenup yet? Make sure you're protected." "The prenup protects her, not me." Frank blinked. "What kind of prenup is that?" "The kind where I walk away with nothing if it doesn't work out." "Jesus, Marcus. You're not even going to fight for—" "I'm not here to take from her." Marcus's voice was flat. "I'm here to make sure my kid has a future." The conversations washed over him advice he didn't want, congratulations that felt like condolences, family members suddenly interested in his life after years of polite distance. Garrett was the only one who pulled him aside, leading him to the backyard where they could talk without an audience. Garrett lit a cigarette, offered one to Marcus. Marcus declined. They stood in the cold November air, watching their breath cloud between them. "I get why you're doing this," Garrett said quietly. "I'd probably do the same if I had a kid to feed. But rich people don't do anything without a reason. If she's marrying you, there's something she wants. Something specific. You figured out what that is yet?" Marcus shook his head. "She keeps testing me. Says she wants to see how I behave when no one's rewarding me for it." "Is testing you how?" "That's the problem. I don't know. Everything feels like a test, but I don't know the questions, don't know if I'm passing or failing." He paused. "What do you think she wants?" Garrett took a long drag. "Doesn't matter what I think. Matters what you think. Because whatever it is, you're going to have to give it to her for at least a year, or you walk away with nothing." "I know. Do you?" Garrett's voice was sharp. "Mark, listen. Rich people test you. They do it in ways you don't see coming. They put you in situations where you have to choose, and every choice tells them something about who you are. Just watch yourself. Don't give her ammunition." "Ammunition for what?" "For when she decides this was a mistake." Marcus stared at his brother. "You think she's going to back out?" "I think she's testing you for a reason. And when you fail, when not, if, because nobody passes tests they don't know they're taking, she's going to need a reason to end it. So don't give her one. Be careful, be smart, and for God's sake, don't trust her just because she's helping you." They went back inside to the sounds of family gossip and clinking glasses, but Garrett's words stayed with Marcus like a splinter under the skin. Ammunition. Tests. Failure waiting in the wings. What the hell had he agreed to? 2 weeks after the engagement became official, Sharon Mills called again. This time, the message was different. "Ms. Brennan would like to meet Ethan. This afternoon, if possible." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Hope, or maybe fear. He picked Ethan up from school early, the boy bouncing with excitement in the passenger seat. "We're really going to the big house?" "Yeah, bud." "Is Victoria nice?" "I think so." "You'll have to tell me what you think." Ethan clutched his toy telescope in both hands, the cardboard tube wrapped in duct tape where it had started to fall apart. Marcus had tried to talk him into leaving it home, but Ethan had insisted. What if she wants to see it? Sharon met them at the door, her expression neutral as always, and led them to the conservatory. Victoria was waiting by the ant farm, her wheelchair positioned so she could watch the insects work. She turned when they entered, her eyes moving from Marcus to Ethan and back again. "You must be Ethan." The boy nodded, suddenly shy. "Come here, I want to show you something." Ethan looked at Marcus, who nodded. The boy approached slowly, still clutching his telescope. Victoria gestured to the terrarium. "Do you know what these are?" "Ants. Harvester ants specifically. They build entire cities underground. See these tunnels? Each ant has a job. Some are workers carrying food, some are soldiers protecting the colony, and somewhere down there is a queen who keeps the whole system going. No one ant is more important than another. They all need each other. If even one stops doing their job, the colony suffers." Ethan stared at the ants with fascination. "My dad says everyone has to do their part." "Your father is a smart man." Victoria's eyes met Marcus's over Ethan's head. "Do you like space?" Ethan's face lit up. "I love space. I want to be a NASA engineer when I grow up." "Would you like to see something?" She wheeled toward the elevator, and Ethan followed without hesitation. Marcus trailed behind, watching this woman he barely knew interact with his son like it was the most natural thing in the world. The elevator took them to the roof deck, a space Marcus hadn't known existed. In the center, on a custom platform, sat a telescope. Not a toy. A real one, the kind that cost thousands of dollars. Victoria showed Ethan how to adjust the focus, how to find Saturn in the daylight sky. The boy pressed his eye to the lens and gasped. "I can see the rings. Beautiful, isn't it?" Victoria's voice was gentle. "The universe is bigger than any problem we have down here. When you look at something that far away, that ancient, your troubles seem smaller." Ethan turned to her, his 7-year-old face serious. "My dad says you're going to marry him." "That's right." "Are you nice?" "He deserves someone nice." Marcus felt his throat tighten. Victoria's expression shifted surprise, or maybe something deeper. She glanced at Marcus in the doorway before answering. "Your father is trying very hard to take care of you. That's what good fathers do." "Are you going to take care of him?" Ethan's voice was earnest. "He needs someone to take care of him too. He works really hard and he's always worried, and I think he's lonely even though he doesn't say it." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than Marcus had ever heard it. "I hope so, Ethan. I really hope so." They stayed for another hour. Ethan asked 1,000 questions about the telescope, about space, about whether Victoria thought there was life on other planets. She answered each one with patience Marcus didn't know she possessed. When it was time to go, Ethan hugged her without prompting a quick embrace before running to Marcus. As Sharon walked them to the door, Ethan whispered to Marcus, "Dad, I think she's lonely." Like really, really lonely. Marcus looked back toward the conservatory where Victoria sat alone among her plants and her ant farm and her expensive telescope. A woman who had everything and nothing, surrounded by wealth, but isolated by it. His 7-year-old son had seen in minutes what Marcus had missed. Victoria Brennan wasn't just testing him. She was searching for something she'd lost and didn't know how to find. The lawyer's office was on the 40th floor of the U.S. Steel Tower downtown. Robert Sullivan was 58, distinguished-looking, and carried himself with the authority of someone who'd spent decades protecting rich people's money from those who might try to take it. He spread the prenuptial agreement across his massive desk, each page thick with legal language that might as well have been written in Latin for all Marcus understood it. "Let me explain the key terms, Mr. Reed." Robert's voice was precise, each word carefully chosen. You will have no claim to Ms. Brennan's business real estate investments or inheritances. You will receive a monthly stipend of $3,000 for personal expenses. Housing will be provided, but all property remains in Ms. Brennan's name. The only irrevocable trust is for your son's education that's guaranteed regardless of what happens to the marriage. Everything else is contingent on the marriage lasting at least 1 year. Do you understand? Marcus nodded. He understood. He'd be given enough to survive enough to not feel completely dependent, but nothing that would allow him independence. Clever. Cruel, maybe, but clever. Mr. Reed, you understand you're entitled to legal counsel before signing this. I can't afford a lawyer. Ms. Brennan would pay for one. Why? So I can ask for more. Marcus looked at the attorney directly. I'm not here to take from her. I'm here to make sure my kid has a future. If she wants to protect her money, that's her right. Robert studied him with the clinical interest of someone examining an unusual specimen. That's unusual. Most people in your position would negotiate. I'm not most people. I'm a guy who ran out of options. Robert made a note on a legal pad. Marcus didn't miss the action. Ms. Brennan requested I make note of your reactions during this meeting. Verbatim. She's testing me again. Robert didn't confirm or deny, just slid the papers across the desk. Sign here, here, and here. Marcus signed without hesitation. Each signature felt like giving away a piece of himself. His pride, his autonomy, his right to walk away if things got unbearable. But Ethan's face floated in his mind. His son asking about the field trip. His son wearing the same 3 shirts. His son learning at 7 years old that sometimes you didn't get what you wanted, that sometimes you settled for less than you deserved. He signed the last page and pushed the documents back across the desk. Is that all? For now. Robert collected the papers with practiced efficiency. Congratulations, Mr. Reed. You're getting married. It didn't feel like congratulations. It felt like sentencing. Chaba. 2 weeks later, another dinner invitation arrived, not from Sharon, but from Victoria herself. The note was handwritten brief. Dinner at the estate. 7 p.m. I'd like to talk. Marcus arrived early, nervous in a way he hadn't been since the first meeting. Maybe she'd changed her mind. Maybe the tests had revealed something that disqualified him. Maybe this was where it all fell apart. Sharon answered the door, led him to the dining room. The table was set for 2 candles expensive china, the kind of formal dinner that made Marcus acutely aware of his Walmart button-down and work pants. Sharon gestured to a chair. Ms. Brennan was called away on urgent business. She asked that you dine anyway and feel free to explore the house. She apologizes for the inconvenience. Marcus stared at the empty chair across from him. She's not coming. I'm afraid not. Please eat. The kitchen prepared your meal. Sharon disappeared, leaving Marcus alone in a dining room that could seat 20. He sat at one end of the massive table, a plate of food that probably cost more than his weekly grocery budget, in front of him, and felt the absurdity of his situation settle over him like a weighted blanket. She's testing me again, seeing if I'll steal something, seeing if I'll snoop, seeing if I'll leave angry when she doesn't show. Marcus ate mechanically, tasting nothing. When he finished, he stood and did exactly what Sharon had suggested he explored. Not because he wanted to, but because he suspected that's what Victoria expected. Another test. Another chance to reveal his character through his choices. The library was floor-to-ceiling books, most of which looked untouched. A home theater with leather recliners and a screen that took up an entire wall. A gym with equipment adapted for wheelchair use, parallel bars, modified weight machines, everything designed for someone with limited mobility. Every room was pristine, sterile, expensive, and every room felt empty in a way that had nothing to do with furniture. Marcus found himself in what must be Victoria's home office. The door was unlocked deliberately, he suspected. Her desk was organized with military precision, but it was the single-framed photograph that caught his attention. Young Victoria, maybe in her 20s, standing between an elderly couple. Her parents, clearly, she had her mother's eyes, her father's sharp chin. They were at a park somewhere, all three smiling. Victoria looked happy in a way Marcus had never seen her look in person. He stared at that photograph for a long time, seeing in it the ghost of who she used to be before the wealth, before the wheelchair, before whatever had happened to make her so guarded. She'd been human once, capable of joy. What had stripped that away, Marcus left the office without touching anything. As he descended the stairs, movement caught his eye. Victoria's wheelchair parked in the hallway above, empty. She was here, had been here the whole time, watching. He left without saying goodbye. Sharon saw him out with the same neutral expression, as if standing up a dinner guest was perfectly normal behavior. In his car, Marcus sat with his hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm the rage building in his chest. Not anger at being tested, he'd accepted that, but anger at being manipulated, at being treated like a lab rat in an experiment he hadn't consented to, at having his dignity stripped away piece by piece while some billionaire watched from the shadows to see how he'd react. But what choice did he have? 8 weeks had become 6. The eviction had been delayed by the landlord after Marcus mentioned he was moving soon. Ethan had told his teacher the good news: they were moving to a big house, his dad was getting married, everything was going to be okay. The boy's hope was a fragile thing Marcus couldn't bear to break. So he swallowed his rage, swallowed his pride, swallowed everything that made him feel like a person instead of a commodity. And he drove home to the apartment they'd be leaving soon, to the son who believed his father was doing the right thing. 5 weeks before the wedding, the whispers became shouts. At the Giant Eagle grocery store, a woman from Diane's church saw Marcus in the produce section and made her comment loud enough for half the store to hear. Shame when men give up on themselves. At school pickup, other parents whispered and pointed. Marcus saw the judgment in their eyes, heard the speculation in their lowered voices. Gold digger. Opportunist. That guy who's marrying the crippled billionaire for her money. Ethan asked why people were staring at them. Marcus knelt to his son's level in the parking lot, ignoring the eyes on his back. Listen to me. My father, your grandfather, worked in the steel mills for 30 years. Came home every day covered in soot, hands scarred from the work. He taught me something important. Marcus made sure Ethan was looking at him. He said a man's character isn't measured by what he has. It's measured by what he does when he has nothing. Right now, I've got nothing. But I've got you and I've got my word. That's enough. Grandpa said that every day of his life, and now I'm saying it to you. Marcus squeezed his son's shoulder. I'm marrying Victoria because it means you'll have opportunities I never had. That's the truth. If people want to make it ugly, that's their problem, not ours. Are we bad people now? No, buddy. We're just people trying to survive. But the question haunted Marcus. Were they bad people? Was he bad for doing this? For trading whatever shred of dignity he had left for stability? For choosing survival over pride? His father's voice echoed in his memory. Character is what you do when you have nothing. Marcus had nothing. What did that make his choices worth? 6 days before the wedding, Robert Sullivan called. His voice was tense, apologetic. Mr. Reed, I need you to come to the office. Ms. Brennan's family has requested additional terms to the prenuptial agreement. Marcus felt ice in his stomach. What kind of terms? It's better if we discuss this in person. The meeting was brief and brutal. The new document stripped away even the pretense of protection. Marcus would waive his right to contest the prenup, waive spousal support in the event of divorce, waive any claim to property appreciation. If the marriage ended, he'd leave with the clothes on his back. Nothing more. Robert pushed the papers across the desk, his expression uncomfortable. Mr. Reed, these terms are extraordinarily one-sided. I strongly recommend you push back, negotiate, ask for something. Marcus read through the document carefully. Every clause was designed to humiliate him, to make absolutely certain he understood his place in this arrangement. He was nothing. would remain nothing. His only value was in whatever Victoria saw in him, and the moment that value disappeared, so would everything else. Why should I push back? Because you're entitled to basic protections. I came into this with nothing. Marcus set the papers down. If it ends, I leave with nothing. That's fair. Most people don't see it that way. I'm not most people. Marcus picked up the pen. I'm a guy who ran out of options. If Victoria's family wants to protect her money, that's their right. I'm not here to take anything. Robert watched him sign each page, his expression unreadable. When Marcus finished, the lawyer leaned back in his chair. Ms. Brennan personally opposed these additional terms. Her family insisted. She wanted you to know that. Marcus looked up. Then why did she let them at it? She said she wanted to see if you'd sign anyway. Another test. Always another test. Marcus stood exhausted by the constant examination of his character. Is there anything else? No. That's everything. Robert stood as well, extending his hand. For what it's worth, Mr. Reed, I think you're making a mistake. But I respect why you're making it. Marcus left the steel tower and walked out onto Grant Street. Evening rush hour. People streaming past in expensive coats, carrying briefcases, heading to homes and families and lives that made sense. Marcus stood on the sidewalk and watched them flow around him like a river around a stone. She's not testing whether I'm good enough for her. She's testing how much humiliation I'll endure. The realization hit like a physical blow. Victoria wasn't looking for integrity or honor or any of the qualities his father had taught him to value. She was looking for someone broken enough, desperate enough to accept whatever she demanded, without question. Someone who'd sign away their rights, swallow their pride, endure public shame, all for the chance at stability. And Marcus had proven again and again that he was exactly that broken, that desperate. What does that say about what she thinks of me? What does it say about what I think of myself? He stood on Grant Street as darkness fell over Pittsburgh, the city lights reflecting off the rivers below, and felt something inside him crack. Not break, not yet, but crack. A fissure running through the foundation of who he'd believed himself to be. His father had said character was what you did when you had nothing. But his father had never been this desperate, had never had to choose between dignity and survival, had never stood on a street corner and realized he'd trade anything, everything to keep his child safe. Marcus walked back to where he'd parked his beat-up Honda and sat behind the wheel for 20 minutes before he could trust himself to drive. Tomorrow was Sunday. Ethan had a school project. They needed poster board and markers. Normal things. He'd focus on normal things. In 6 days, he'd marry a woman he'd met 4 times. A woman who was testing him in ways he couldn't see and didn't understand. A woman who'd just made him sign away the last shred of autonomy he possessed. 6 days. Then it would be real. Then there'd be no going back. Marcus started the engine and drove home through the dark streets of Pittsburgh, past the homeless encampments under the overpasses, past the shuttered factories that used to employ men like his father, past the neighborhoods where people like him used to build lives that meant something. And he wondered if there was any difference between bending and breaking, or if they were just different words for the same kind of destruction. December 14th arrived like a storm front moving in from the west. Marcus and Ethan spent the day packing the last boxes in their apartment. Clothes, books, the cardboard telescope, the homemade solar system model. The landlord had already shown the place to new tenants. Someone else would live with the peeling paint and clanking radiator. Someone else's kid would grow up learning that $45 was too much to ask for. Ethan found the old wedding photo again, tucked in a drawer Marcus had forgotten to clear. The boy held it up, studying the 3 faces, Marcus, Jessica, and himself at 3 years old, all of them smiling at the zoo. You looked happy. Marcus took the photo, ran his thumb across the glossy surface. We were. For a while. What happened? How many times had his son asked variations of that question? How many different ways had Marcus tried to explain that sometimes things just fell apart? I thought love was enough. Marcus set the photo on the counter, looked at it from a distance. Turns out it's not. But maybe respect is. Maybe commitment is. Maybe those things matter more than feelings. Do you respect Victoria? I don't know her well enough yet. Marcus was trying to be honest, but I respect what she's built, and I think she respects that I'm trying. Ethan nodded, accepting this with the wisdom of a child who'd learned early that the world didn't make sense, but you kept going anyway. Are you scared about tomorrow? Yeah, I am. Ethan wrapped his arms around Marcus's waist, a fierce hug that contained all the faith a 7-year-old could muster. It'll be okay, Dad. After Ethan went to bed, Marcus sat in the bathroom with the door closed, holding that wedding photo in both hands. The apartment was quiet except for the sounds of the building settling pipes, groaning neighbors walking overhead, the city humming outside. These were the last hours of his old life. Tomorrow, everything changed. He stared at the man in the photo, younger, hopeful, believing that hard work and love would be enough to build a life. That man seemed impossibly naive now, impossibly far away. The tears came without warning. Not sobs, just tears running down his face in the dim bathroom light. Marcus let himself feel the weight of it all, not just the poverty or the shame, but the loneliness. The ache of being a man without a partner, a father without support. For the first time in 2 years, he allowed himself to grieve. Not for what he was losing, but for what he'd never really had. He cried for the marriage that had failed, for the one he was about to enter, for the boy sleeping in the next room who deserved so much more than a desperate father making impossible choices. When the tears stopped, Marcus washed his face and looked at himself in the mirror. 38-years-old face, weathered by stress eyes that looked ancient. Tomorrow, he'd marry a stranger. And somehow, that was the most honest thing he'd done in years. He dried his face, turned off the light, and checked on Ethan one last time before trying to sleep. The boy was curled around his cardboard telescope, already dreaming of better things. Marcus stood in the doorway and made a silent promise. Whatever happened tomorrow, whatever this marriage became, he'd make sure his son never regretted trusting him. Morning arrived too fast and not fast enough. Marcus woke at 5, gave up trying to sleep at 5:30, and showered in the pre-dawn darkness. The suit Garrett had bought him hung on the back of the bathroom door, $150 from Men's Warehouse, the most anyone in his family had ever spent on clothes for him. It fit poorly, the shoulders too wide, the pants slightly too long, but it was clean and pressed and the best Marcus Reed would look on his wedding day. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror, trying to knot a tie with hands that wouldn't stay steady. In 2 hours, he'd be married to a woman he'd met 3 times. She knew nothing about him except that he was desperate. He knew nothing about her except that she was testing him, and somehow they had to build a life on that foundation. The man in the mirror looked older than 38, looked beaten, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been last night after the tears. Maybe that was growth. Maybe that was just resignation. Marcus couldn't tell the difference anymore. Ethan bounded in wearing his own small suit, eyes bright with excitement. "Big day, Dad." "Yeah, bud. Big day." They drove across Highland Park Bridge as the sun broke over the city, turning the rivers gold. Ethan pressed his face to the window, watching Pittsburgh wake up. Marcus gripped the steering wheel and tried to remember how to breathe. "Dad?" Ethan's voice was small. "What if she doesn't like me?" Marcus pulled his attention from the road, looked at his son's worried face. "She will. She already does. And if anything goes wrong, we'll figure it out together. You and me, that's never changing." "Promise?" "Promise." The venue was in Shadyside, a boutique hotel with a small ballroom. 30 chairs, simple altar, no flowers, no music. The setup looked like a business meeting more than a wedding. Marcus parked and sat in the car for a moment, Ethan beside him. both of them staring at the entrance. "Ready?" Ethan nodded. Marcus wasn't ready, but ready didn't matter anymore. He got out of the car. Inside, Diane and Garrett were already waiting. Diane looked satisfied, like a general watching a battle plan come together. Garrett looked tense, kept glancing at Marcus like he was waiting for his brother to bolt. A handful of people Marcus didn't recognize sat in the back rows, Victoria's business associates probably, people who'd come to witness a transaction. Sharon Mills stood near the entrance with her clipboard checking details with professional efficiency. She nodded at Marcus when he entered, but didn't smile. Victoria was already seated in her wheelchair near the front, facing away from the door. White dress, elegant but understated. She didn't turn when Marcus arrived. The officiant was a kind-faced man in his 60s who introduced himself as Pastor Mitchell. He shook Marcus's hand, asked if he was nervous. Marcus said yes. The pastor smiled like that was normal, expected, like every groom didn't feel like he was walking toward an execution. Garrett squeezed Marcus's shoulder, once brief, solid, the only support anyone had offered that felt real. Marcus took his place at the altar and waited. Pastor Mitchell opened a small leather-bound book and began. The words washed over Marcus without meaning. Marriage is built on trust, on the willingness to see each other fully and accept what we find there. It requires courage to be vulnerable, to let another person witness our weaknesses as well as our strengths. The irony was suffocating. This marriage was built on tests and secrets and transactions. Nothing about it was vulnerable. Nothing about it was trust. Marcus kept his eyes forward, feeling the judgment from every angle. Cousin Jennifer whispering behind him. The strangers in the back rows watching with detached curiosity. Ethan in the front row, swinging his legs, oblivious to the tension thick enough to choke on. Pastor Mitchell turned to Victoria. "Victoria Brennan, do you take this man?" He didn't finish. Victoria reached down and gripped the arms of her wheelchair. In one smooth motion, she stood. The room went silent. Not ceremony silent, shocked silent. The kind of silence that happens when reality breaks in half. Victoria stood there in her white dress, perfectly steady. No hesitation, no struggle. She stepped away from the wheelchair like it was a coat she'd shrugged off. Her posture was straight, her movements fluid. She'd always been able to stand, always been able to walk. The room erupted. Gasps. Diane's voice sharp with outrage. Garrett swearing under his breath. Someone in the back rows stood up. Marcus couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he was seeing. Ethan tugged at his sleeve. "Dad, what's happening?" Marcus couldn't answer. His mind had shut down, overwhelmed by the impossibility of what he was witnessing. The woman who'd sat in that wheelchair at every meeting, who'd been paralyzed 3 years ago in a car crash, who'd become the center of every whispered conversation about his desperation, she was standing. Walking. Had always been able to. For a flickering moment, an image flashed in Marcus's mind, all three of them at the Carnegie Science Center, laughing together at some exhibit. Ethan pointing at something with excitement, Victoria's hand in Marcus's genuine happiness, radiating from all of them. The vision came and went in a heartbeat so vivid it felt like a memory instead of imagination. Marcus blinked. Victoria stood before him now, her expression calm, but her eyes finally showing emotion. She turned to address the room. "I owe everyone an explanation, but especially you, Marcus." She paused, let the silence stretch. "I was never paralyzed. The wheelchair was a choice. A test." The words landed like grenades. Diane was on her feet now, face red. "You humiliated our family." Victoria didn't flinch. "I humiliated myself. I pretended to be disabled to find someone honest." She looked at Marcus. "I've spent years being pursued by men who saw my bank account before they saw me. The last man I was engaged to stole $50,000 and disappeared before the wedding. The one before that tried to blackmail me with fabricated photos of an affair. After my company went public, I learned that people lie when the reward is worth it. Her voice remained steady, clinical as she explained. The wheelchair was a way to find out who someone really was. If a man was willing to marry me when he thought all I offered was money and difficulty, then maybe that man was different. Marcus found his voice. It came out rough, scraped, raw. You could have just asked. You could have been honest from the start. Would you have answered honestly if you thought I could walk? Victoria's eyes held his. Or would you have performed who you thought I wanted you to be? So you made me into a public joke. Marcus felt the anger building, now replacing shock. Made people call me a parasite. Made my son hear his father called a failure. That was your test. Yes. The honesty of it was almost worse than a lie would have been. Diane was still shouting something, but Marcus couldn't hear her over the blood rushing in his ears. It was easy for you to design tests when you had all the power. You had money security control. I had nothing. His voice rose. You put me in a position where my only option was to say yes, then judged me for saying yes. You call that fair? Victoria's expression shifted, something like regret crossing her features. No, it wasn't fair. Fairness wasn't my priority. Survival was. She paused. I was trying to protect myself, and in doing so I made your life harder. I acknowledge that. The room had quieted. Everyone watching this confrontation unfold this raw honesty that had no place in a wedding ceremony. Pastor Mitchell stood frozen, his book still open, clearly uncertain whether to intervene. Victoria took a step closer to Marcus. I need to know something, and I need you to be honest because I haven't been. Her voice was quieter now, meant only for him, even though everyone could hear. Did you marry me for the money? Or did you choose to see this through because of who you are? Marcus stared at her. At this woman who'd orchestrated months of manipulation, who'd watched him sign away his rights, endure public shame, accept humiliation after humiliation, who'd tested him in ways he still didn't fully understand. I'm here because I was desperate. The words came out hard, unvarnished. I won't lie about that. I needed a way to keep my son safe. But once I made that choice, I committed to it. I signed away every right I had because I wanted to prove at least to myself that I still had integrity, even when it cost me everything. He paused, the anger draining out of him, leaving only exhaustion. I wasn't trying to pass your test. I was trying to survive without losing myself completely. If that made me worthy in your eyes, then fine. But I want you to know it wasn't easy. It wasn't noble. It was painful and humiliating, and harder than anything I've ever done. Victoria nodded slowly. That's what I needed to know. She turned to Pastor Mitchell. We can continue the ceremony if Marcus is willing. The choice is his. I made mine 2 months ago when I agreed to move forward. She looked back at Marcus. If you want to walk away now, I'd understand. I've put you through enough. Marcus looked at Ethan sitting in the front row with wide, confused eyes. Looked at Garrett, who gave a small nod that meant whatever you decide, I'm with you. Looked at his mother, who looked like she didn't know whether to be furious or relieved. Looked at the strangers in the back rows, the ones who'd whispered about him, judged him, called him names. He realized he didn't care what they thought anymore. Their opinions had no power over him unless he gave them that power. Marcus turned back to Victoria. I'm not walking away. I made a commitment. He took a breath. Not because you have money, not because I passed some test, but because I chose this path and I'm going to see it through. I'm tired of running from hard things. This is one thing I can control my word. Victoria's expression softened in a way Marcus had never seen. That's all I wanted to know. She extended her hand. Marcus looked at it for a long moment before taking it. Her grip was firm, warm, real. I know what people called you, she said quietly. I heard every whisper. I let it happen because I needed to see if you'd run, if you'd demand guarantees, if you'd try to negotiate. You did none of those things. Most men in your position would have found a way to secure something for themselves. You accepted that you might leave with nothing. That's rare. That's what I was looking for. Pastor Mitchell cleared his throat. Should we continue? Victoria looked at Marcus. He nodded. The ceremony was abbreviated, rushed, the officiant's voice shaky as he went through the vows. When he pronounced them married, there was no applause, just heavy, uncertain silence. Marcus and Victoria stood together at the altar, hands still clasped, and Marcus felt like he'd survived something but didn't know what came next. Ethan approached cautiously. Are you okay, Victoria? She smiled at him, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen. I am. Thank you for asking. Ethan looked between her and Marcus, processing. I don't understand why you were in the wheelchair if you didn't need it. Were you scared of something? Victoria knelt to his level, and Marcus saw tears in her eyes for the first time. Yes, I was very scared of being hurt again. My dad wouldn't hurt you. Ethan's voice was certain. He's the best dad. Victoria's voice caught. Your dad is a good man. I hope you know that. I do. He's the best dad. Diane approached, still unsettled. I don't know what to think about this. I understand. Victoria stood. I hope in time we can move past it. Diane didn't respond, just took Ethan by the hand and led him outside. Garrett clapped Marcus on the shoulder, asked if he was good. Marcus said he thought so. Garrett said he'd call later, then followed their mother out. The strangers filed out quietly, their whispers now turned inward. Sharon Mills folded the wheelchair with neutral efficiency she'd known all along. Marcus realized that now. Did Sharon know? Yes, she was the only one. Sharon caught Marcus's eye as she carried the wheelchair past. Something in her expression, not quite approval, but acknowledgement. She'd watched him navigate this impossible situation, and maybe she thought he'd done okay. Or maybe she was just glad it was over. Victoria touched Marcus's arm. We should talk. Not now, but soon. There are things we need to figure out. Boundaries. Expectations. She paused. This marriage is real, but it doesn't have to look like anyone else's. We'll define it ourselves. Marcus nodded. They walked out of the ceremony hall together, the wheelchair left behind like shed skin. Outside, harsh December sunlight and cold wind off the river. Victoria's Tesla SUV waited Sharon behind the wheel. Garrett's truck was parked nearby, Ethan visible in the passenger seat. We'll meet you at the house, Garrett called. Marcus and Victoria climbed into the back seat, first time truly alone without performance or audience. The car pulled away from the venue, heading toward Sewickley Heights. Why tell me today? Why not before? Victoria stared out the window at Pittsburgh passing by. Because I needed you to make the choice without knowing. If I'd told you beforehand, you would have adjusted. You would have performed. I needed to see who you were when you thought there was no reward. And who am I? Someone who kept his word when it cost him everything. She turned to look at him. Someone who endured humiliation without breaking. Someone who put his son first even when it destroyed his pride. That's not heroic. That's just desperation. No. Victoria's voice was firm. Desperation is what brings you to the choice. What you do after that's character. They rode in silence for a while, the city giving way to suburbs, suburbs giving way to estates. Marcus watched the landscape change and tried to process what his life had become. Married, to a woman who'd manipulated him for months, who'd tested him without mercy, who was looking at him now like maybe she regretted some of it. I've been angry at you all day, Marcus said finally, but I also understand. You shouldn't understand. What I did was cruel. Yeah, it was. Marcus met her eyes. But I've been lied to by people who said they loved me. You lied to test me. At least your lie had a purpose. That doesn't make it right. No, but it makes it honest. In a weird way. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. I'm not good at this. At trusting. At letting people in. I'm not good at accepting help or admitting when I've failed. So we're both broken. Marcus almost smiled. Maybe that's a place to start. The estate looked different in daylight without the nervousness of a first visit clouding his perception. Sharon opened the gates and Garrett's truck was already parked on the circular drive. Ethan was running across the front lawn, arms spread like airplane wings, his small suit jacket flapping behind him. Victoria watched through the window. He's a good kid. He's the only thing I got right. That's enough. Sharon showed Marcus and Ethan to their wing of the house, a guest suite with 2 connected bedrooms, bathroom, sitting area. Ethan's room had the telescope by the window, books on shelves, everything set up like it had been waiting for them. The boy was overwhelmed, running from corner to corner, touching everything, like he couldn't believe it was real. This is all mine. Victoria stood in the doorway. All yours. Marcus caught her eye over Ethan's head. You did this. I asked Sharon to set it up. I remembered you said he likes space. And that night, after Ethan finally crashed from exhaustion and excitement, Marcus found Victoria in the library. She was sitting in a regular chair, no wheelchair anywhere, legs curled under her, staring at the fireplace. Marcus sat across from her. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. I can do that, Marcus said eventually. Give you time. Give you honesty. No more tests. If you have a question, ask. If I fail, tell me. But don't make me guess. Victoria nodded. I can do that, but I need something from you too. What? Time. Time to learn how to trust again. I've been alone a long time. By choice, but lonely. I understand lonely. Then maybe we can be lonely together. Until we're not. They sat in the library until the fire burned low, talking about boundaries and expectations and what this marriage would actually mean. Separate bedrooms. Separate lives in many ways. But commitment she wouldn't abandon him and Ethan, and she asked the same in return. The next morning, breakfast was awkward. Marcus and Victoria being overly polite, stilted like strangers forced to share space. Ethan watched them with the frank assessment only children possess. You guys are weird. Marcus looked up. What? If you like each other, just say so. That's what kids do. Victoria almost smiled. It's more complicated than that, Ethan. Why, you're both nice. You both want me to be happy. Sounds simple to me. Marcus met Victoria's eyes across the table. She gave a small, genuine smile, not at Ethan this time, but at Marcus. He returned it tentative, but real. Maybe he's right, Victoria said. Maybe he is. 3 months later, Pittsburgh was beginning to thaw. March meant mud and rain and the promise of spring that never quite arrived when you wanted it. Marcus still worked at the warehouse. Victoria had offered to let him quit, offered multiple times. He'd refused every time. I need to earn something for myself. She'd understood without argument. Ethan thrived in ways that made Marcus's chest ache. Better school science tutor twice a week, telescope time with Victoria on clear nights. But he was still the same sweet kid, still asked if they could afford things, even though money wasn't tight anymore, still talked about his mom occasionally, with that careful hopefulness that broke Marcus's heart. The partnership between Marcus and Victoria wasn't traditional, wasn't romance, but it was something built slowly, carefully, like trust always had to be built. Dinner together most nights, conversations that went deeper than weather and schedules, Victoria teaching Ethan about business and strategy, Marcus teaching her about patience and letting go of control. One evening, Marcus came home from his shift to find them in the dining room, Ethan explaining his science project with wild hand gestures, while Victoria listened with genuine interest. "Dad," Ethan waved him over. "Victoria says we can go to the Carnegie Science Center this weekend." All three of us. "The planetarium has a new show about Mars." Victoria looked up, and there was something different in her eyes. Warmth. Openness. "If that's okay with you." "Yeah, let's do it." All three of us. Marcus and Victoria held each other's gaze for a moment, some understanding passing between them that didn't need words. All three of us. The warehouse break room was the same as it had always been. Fluorescent lights, vending machines that ate your quarters tables marked with years of coffee rings. Marcus was eating lunch alone when Greg Sampson walked in. 6 months of careful distance between them ever since the wedding. Greg had stopped making comments, but the judgment never left his eyes. Today was different. Greg approached Marcus's table directly, arms crossed. "Heard your kid got into that fancy prep school, the one in Fox Chapel." Marcus looked up. "Yeah, he starts in the fall. You still with that woman?" "She's my wife." "Right." Greg's voice had that edge again. "Must be nice. The money." Marcus set down his sandwich. "It's not about the money anymore. What's it about then? Keeping your word. That's all any man really has." Greg's expression hardened. "You really believe that? You married her for money. Everyone knows it. You're a kept man, Reed. Don't pretend it's something noble." The other workers in the break room had gone quiet, listening. Marcus felt that old shame trying to rise up, but it didn't have the same power anymore. 6 months of waking up every day and choosing to stay. Choosing to build something with Victoria. Choosing to be the father Ethan deserved. Those choices had weight. They mattered. "Think whatever you want, Greg." "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." Greg's voice rose. "You gave up being a man, sold yourself. You're exactly what I said you were, a parasite." Dave Richardson stood up from a table in the corner. Marcus barely knew him, older guy, been at the warehouse 15 years, mostly kept to himself. But now Dave crossed the break room with purpose, getting between Marcus and Greg. "Greg, shut up." Greg blinked. "What?" "I said shut the hell up." Dave's voice was calm but firm. "Reed's kid is 7 years old. What would you do if your boy was about to be homeless? You'd do the same damn thing." Other workers were nodding now, murmuring agreement. Greg looked around, realizing he'd lost the room. "I'm just saying—" "No, you're saying what cowards say." Dave cut him off. "Reed's got more guts than all of us. He did what he had to do, and he kept his head up. That's a man. That's what a father does." A younger worker clapped Marcus on the shoulder. "Dave's right. My wife heard what you did, what you went through. She said she'd be lucky to have someone who'd fight that hard for our kids." Another voice from the back. "Took balls, Reed. Real balls. More than I've got." Greg stood there, face red, realizing he'd been publicly overruled by the same men who'd whispered behind Marcus's back 6 months ago. The vindication felt strange, not triumphant, just quiet. Real. Dave turned to Marcus. "You did good, Reed. Don't let anyone tell you different." Marcus nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. "Thanks, Dave." Greg walked out without another word. The break room slowly returned to normal conversations, resuming people going back to their lunches. But something had shifted. Marcus felt it in the way people met his eyes now, instead of looking away. Felt it in the nods he got walking past. He'd been tested by more than just Victoria. He'd been tested by his community, by his peers, by every man who'd judged him and found him wanting. And now, somehow he'd passed that test too. Marcus drove home through the late afternoon light past the old apartment in Lawrenceville, where this had all started. Someone else lived there now. Someone else's kid was learning about poverty and broken promises. Marcus said a silent prayer for them, whoever they were, and kept driving. The estate was home now. Not in the way his father's house had been home or even the apartment had been home, but in a new way he was still learning to define. Home was where Ethan laughed without worry, where Victoria smiled more often than she used to, where Marcus could sit in the evening without the constant weight of failure pressing down on his chest. He parked next to Victoria's Tesla, his beat-up Honda looking ridiculous beside it, but belonging there anyway. Through the window, he could see them at the dining room table. Victoria helping Ethan with homework, both of them bent over a textbook. She was laughing at something he'd said, her whole face transformed by genuine joy. Marcus stood on the lawn for a moment, watching them through the glass. This is what he'd been fighting for. Not money, not escape. Family. He walked inside. They looked up as he entered. "You're home." Victoria's voice was warm now, so different from that first cold greeting 6 months ago. "Yeah, I'm home." Ethan jumped up. "Dad, Victoria says we can build a model rocket this weekend, a real one with an engine and everything." Marcus sat down at the table, feeling the rightness of it. 3 people who'd all been broken in different ways, finding a way to be whole together. Victoria reached across the table, touched his hand briefly. Deliberate contact. Chosen contact. He turned his hand to hold hers. Ethan grinned and went back to his homework like this was the most normal thing in the world. Maybe it was. Maybe normal was just whatever you built when the old definitions stopped working. Marcus thought about his father, dead 15 years now. Thought about the words he'd passed down. A man's character isn't measured by what he has, but by what he does when he has nothing. He'd had nothing. He'd stood anyway, and for the first time in years he wasn't standing alone. Through the window, the last light of day was fading. Outside, Marcus's beat-up Honda sat next to Victoria's Tesla in the driveway, 2 vehicles that had no business being together, but were. Inside, homework papers were scattered across the table, warm light from the chandelier making everything soft and golden. Ethan was humming to himself, Victoria was smiling, and Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. The value of a person, his father used to say, wasn't in what they had or didn't have. It was in how they stood when there was nothing left to lean on. Marcus had stood. He was still standing. And he'd learned that sometimes when you stopped trying to stand alone, you discovered strength you didn't know existed. The evening stretched ahead of them, dinner to make, homework to finish, a rocket to plan. Normal things. Good things. The kind of things Marcus had stopped believing he deserved. But maybe that was the lesson. Maybe none of them had deserved this. Not him, not Victoria, not even Ethan. Maybe life wasn't about deserving. Maybe it was about choosing to keep going when everything told you to quit. About finding people as broken as you were and building something new from the pieces. Marcus squeezed Victoria's hand once before letting go. She smiled at him. Not the cold, calculating smile from their first meeting, but something genuine and hard-won. They'd both been tested. They'd both passed. And now they had the rest of their lives to figure out what came next. "So," Marcus said, looking at Ethan's homework, "what are we building?" And his son's face lit up like the sun, and Victoria laughed, and somewhere in the distance, Pittsburgh hummed with its usual urban symphony, and Marcus Reed, warehouse worker, single father. Desperate man who'd traded his pride for his son's future, realized he'd finally made it home.